I wonder if there have been any studies about this that show like, hey, with increased English skills come, increased or earnings opportunities. And yeah, I came across a couple studies in various different sources. There was one by EF Language First. There was something on Forbes, I believe, as well. And yeah, the basic findings were that, if you can go from just like an intermediate level of English to an advanced level of English, that correlated with typically around like an 18% increase in your earning opportunity. Now, certainly that will vary depending on your field and your other skills, of course, but it just shows that there is a very real economic incentive to, increase your English language skills for sure.
Welcome back to the Career Therapy Podcast, where we help you navigate the emotional and promotional sides of the job search and change careers with confidence. My name is Martin McGovern, founder and lead coach at Career Therapy, and I'm excited to introduce our guest today. Please welcome Kevin Naglich to the podcast. Kevin helps international students and immigrants get out of English intermediate purgatory so they can speak more confidently at work. He is passionate about helping people naturally express themselves and get better jobs. And as the founder of Deliberate English, he's built an online community designed to help busy professionals take their English to the next level faster through active, deliberate practice. Today, we dig into the nuances of professional communications, how what you say shapes your career, and what non-native speakers can do to increase their career success through that same deliberate practice. We appreciate your time and thank you for tuning into this episode of the Career Therapy Podcast. If you want to support the show, you can leave us a review on iTunes or share this with friends. And without further ado, please enjoy this conversation with Kevin Naglich. Kevin, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm super excited to get into it and talk about the work you do and how it can really help people learn how to build confidence and speak more confidently about their careers and really develop in a lot of different ways. One of the things I'd love to just kick things off with is just a quick breakdown of the type of work you do and the people you work with.
Sure, of course. So I help international students and immigrants with an intermediate level of English speak more confidently at work so they can ultimately get a better job, perform better, what have you. And these are typically people that, they can speak, right? That they can communicate. As a native speaker, you might hear them and think, yeah, that's fine. But they're really just not confident in the way that they speak, right? They feel somewhat limited, somewhat trapped. They can't express themselves. And so my mission is to help these individuals get past those sort of internal roadblocks around their language skills so that they can start to do what they really want, which is to succeed in their career, to switch careers, etc.
Yeah. And I was looking through your website and I noticed you have like a really cool sort of breakdown of how much more revenue and money you can make, income you can make based on your ability to communicate. How did you come across that stat and how did you put that together?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was something that I originally thought about because one of my now family members, one of my brother-in-laws, he's an immigrant from Chile, and he was going through this whole process of trying to find a job and didn't know how to do it. Didn't have the confidence, right, to bust into that space. And so I worked with him a lot to try to get him over those hurdles and get him into a career. And as he eventually was able to get a pretty solid job as an admissions advisor at a university, we just thought like, hey, this is something that is very repeatable. This is something that's going to apply to a lot of people. And I wonder if there have been any studies about this that show like, hey, with increased English skills come, increased revenue or earnings opportunities. And yeah, I came across a couple studies in various different sources. There was one by EF Language First. There was something on Forbes, I believe, as well. And yeah, the basic findings were that, if you can go from just like an intermediate level of English to an advanced level of English, that correlated with typically around like an 18% increase in your earning opportunity. Now, certainly that will vary depending on your field and your other skills, of course. But it just shows that there is a very real economic incentive to, increase your English language skills for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it is kind of fun to watch where you and I overlap, right? Because a lot of what I'm doing is helping people build confidence in their storytelling. And really, a lot of my job is communications focused, right? I come from marketing and advertising. And so
Mhm.
you can only imagine, right? Like if someone who's native, who's struggling to tell their story and get their point across and showcase their value and ace a job interview, if they're struggling as much as they are, imagine adding in that additional layer. And I've worked with people from different countries who have been trying to, break into the US market. And I've seen firsthand how difficult it can be, especially if there's a language barrier there. And one of the things you and I were talking about prior is just like that, just because you can get your point across, let's say, doesn't mean you're getting it across in
Mhm.
the emotional way you want, or in the like, necessarily the nuanced way that you really want to get it across. And as people who work in this field, there's a lot that comes through in just body language and confidence and presence and things like that. I always say, your goal is to build trust and rapport in an
Mhm.
interview. But if you're not feeling confident, how are you going to build trust and rapport, right? Especially the rapport piece in your
Right.
case. And so when it comes to that, the difference between the two levels, right? You have someone who's intermediate going to advanced. What does that practically look like? What does the difference practically look like in the people you work with?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that's lost in between those two levels is sort of an ability to deal with nuance. So if you're intermediate, you can talk, you can have a conversation, you can get what you need usually, but you don't really have all of those other little flavors that make our language so interesting and that can convey meaning beyond just what your basic words are. And so, for example, in the English language, we are very concerned about being polite all the time. So when we ask for things, it's like, oh, could you do this? Or if you have time, or if you don't mind, we add these things to everything we say. But in other languages, they're much more direct. It's just like, hey, give me this. And to us, that sounds rude, but to them, that's just normal. And so when you're an intermediate speaker, your biggest reference point is your native language. And so you tend to do a lot of like translating in your head. You're just translating exactly what you would say in your native language into English. And while that may get you the basics that you need, it's not conveying who you are. It's not conveying what you want to convey. And so, like a specific example that I see all the time with some of my clients that I work with at first is like when they need something in an email, it's like, I need you to do this. I need you to send me this. I need. And again, to a native ear, that's like pushy. It's like, oh well, that doesn't sound super polite. I don't get what this person's deal is. Why do they keep saying this to me? But to them, they don't know any better, right? And so that's where I think you start to see some of the difference between, okay, intermediate, I'm basic functionality, I can ask for things, but I'm losing that extra polish. I'm losing that way for me to convey, hey, I am a nice person. I swear I'm a nice person. I swear I'm not trying to be rude here. This is what I know, and this is the best I can do.
That's fascinating. And it's so funny because like when I'm working with people, sometimes they overdo it on the politeness, right? So a big thing that I'm helping people do, and I like that you called out this phrase, I need, right? When it comes to the job search, even for native speakers, there's this hefty focus on like, I'm trying to get a job. I want this position. I want you to take a chance on me. Someone said that yesterday. And I'm like, no company is taking a chance on you. They're either making money
Mhm.
off of your work or they're firing you. That's it at the end of the day. And so it is interesting because it's like you're helping teach people be more polite, and I'm almost helping teach people to be like less polite in a way, but like more direct in terms of like, here's how I bring value. And so it is that kind of nuanced middle ground that we're sort of helping bring people to in order to be able
Mhm.
to be a value add, in order to be able to communicate your ability to help in a great way. And I love your example there of like being too direct in an email, I need, like that is so much of the issue that people have at work. And the reason people don't get promoted and stuff, because it is a relationship situation, right? People are like,
Sure.
I've been here for 5 years and I haven't been promoted or to where I want to be, or, I'm doing such great work. I'm so much smarter than these other people that are getting promoted. Why am I not moving up? And it's like, well, there's politics and there's people and there's relationships you have to manage and stuff like that. And so,
Right.
at what point, like, what are some of the light bulb moments that you see people have when they're moving from that intermediate stage to that advanced stage? What are some of those moments where like, oh my gosh, I'm having like a breakthrough in either how I write emails or how I communicate with people at work?
Yeah. So I think what really this comes down to is part of what I really try to encourage when I'm working with clients, or basically what I base everything on when I'm working with my clients, which is building a consistent feedback loop. So that means they're collecting new things, new expressions, new terms, they're using them in new ways, but then most importantly, I give them feedback on everything. And the reason I say that is because rarely in learning a language is there just oh my God, I watched a video and now I'm great, or I did 1 week of a course and now I'm perfectly fluent and all my mistakes are gone. Like that usually doesn't happen. And this leads to a lot of the problems with confidence because it's a much more gradual process. And it's kind of like when you were a kid and you're growing up, right? Like your parents every day aren't like, wow, you grew so much yesterday. Wow, you grew so much yesterday. Wow, but your grandparents, when they see you once a month, they're like, wow, you grew a lot this past month, right? So it's like, as you're going through this day to day, you don't really see like every day there's a huge light bulb moment. But if you are in a place where you're getting consistent feedback, now there is this external party, me in my case, that's showing you, hey, yeah, look, you did better here, you did better here. We need to refine this piece a little bit more and go from there. But, kind of tying that back to a point you made earlier too, you said sometimes people are too polite. This is a common problem. Like once a language learner, and I was guilty of this too, and still am in some cases when I'm learning Spanish, is that you learn something new and then it's like you think you just need to use it all the time. Like, so if I teach someone how to be polite, then they overuse it. Or like one of my favorite examples is there was this one student I worked with who learned the term, it was snowed under. It's like, oh, I'm snowed under with work. It's another thing, like every time he wanted to say something about just being busy, he was always snowed under. And I'm like, it's a nice term. It's a very descriptive term. But we don't want to use it all the time or it sort of loses its meaning, right? That's an exaggeration. That's something where you say like maybe once a month or at most, right? And that's where that feedback comes in, because without it, you see a term, you use it, okay, cool, I'm going to use this forever now. But it's through that constant feedback loop that not only are you going to see progress, but you're going to make sure that you're using things in the appropriate way and not overdoing it.
Yeah, that's so incredible. I never even thought about phrases like that and how you can overuse them. I was talking to someone yesterday and they had just filled out an entire application. They had to do a whole writing assignment and all this different stuff. And they didn't feel confident about the job and their ability to do it. And they were like, at the end of the optional cover letter, I almost apologized. I almost apologized for my the lack of quality of my work. And she was like, I thought of you, and I was like, Martin would slap me if I said I'm sorry right now. I was like, I didn't realize I had such a slappable energy, but it was just one of those moments where it was just, they were like, oh, right, you're not supposed to apologize for everything, right? You're not. And I think especially if you're lacking confidence, especially if you're not sure what to say, and I've seen that with some of my international clients, is that they over apologize all the time for their inability to say something correctly. And I think in an interview, like the pressure is so hot, right? Like it's, you're almost like, even if you're a native speaker, you're like, did I say that right? Did I ramble too much? Did I answer the question correctly? And then, you add in again, these extra layers and suddenly you're just apologizing after every question. And have you seen different dynamics arise at the different parts of the job search? Like where are the biggest struggles throughout the job search? Is it in writing the resume or the cover letter, or is it in the follow-up emails, maybe the thank you notes, or is it the interview? Like, what parts are the toughest for folks?
Yeah, the problems that are most common, well, I should say, are most commonly complained about are typically speaking and writing. Um, and uncoincidentally, right, that those are both generating the language. So once you get to like an intermediate level or an upper intermediate level, you typically understand more than what you can actually say. So a lot of these people, they can, or they think that, hey, I'm just going to watch a bunch of movies on Netflix or a bunch of videos on YouTube in English, and I'm just going to learn how to speak better. And so that's kind of like a myth, I think, that you see in a lot of places online when you learn about language learning. And then that leads you to start feeling inferior and a lack of confidence because you're like, hey, I've been watching videos, but I'm not improving, right? Like I still have the same problems when I speak and I'm still not writing well. And then you start to blame yourself for that. And so when we think about like a job search perspective, yeah, there's a lack of confidence in their writing and getting their tone across. And then from a speaking perspective, something they often talk about, or my students will talk about, is, I get stuck in a conversation. Like I lose my place. I don't have the vocabulary I want or I need to express that idea. I mean, imagine if you're in a job interview and somebody asks you, hey, tell me about this skill. And you know that you're awesome at that skill, but you don't have the vocabulary that you need to explain how good you are. That, and how frustrating would that be, right? You're trapped in like this language prison. You're inside, I'm really skilled at this, I can do this, but the words that come out of your mouth are just, yes, I can do that. Like that's not selling yourself, like you said earlier. That's not sales. That's just yes or no question. And that's not really painting the picture for that, employer that, yeah, this is someone who has a lot of experience here, that knows it well, that's confident in it. When you just give that basic answer, you're just kind of stuck, right? You're not showing them everything that you can be.
Yeah. Oh man. And this brings us into that storytelling piece, right? Because, a big piece of what I teach people is the STAR method: situation, task, action, result. And I have like a twist on it. It's a spiral method, way worse acronym, but it's situation, problem, action, result, and then the learning from it. And we even toss in at the end, like, ask a question, right? And engage the interviewer back into that rapport. And I would imagine if like, if you're just in that, fact-based sort of storytelling form, you're not going to be able to give that nuance. You're not going to be able to even maybe ask the right questions in the right way. How do you sort of help people with formulating, rapport and asking questions and having a bit of a back and forth as well, versus just the one-way speaking?
Yeah. So a lot of the one-way speaking is because of that inner fear and lack of confidence. And so you're trying to minimize how much you talk because you want to minimize the risk of making a mistake. Like you feel really terrible when you make mistakes. You feel like you're going to sound stupid. And so you typically tend to talk a little less because you don't want to have more opportunities to get stuck and to be able to and start making those mistakes. And so in order to sort of coach some of that rapport building, this is where a specific type of practice comes into play. And it's what's called deliberate practice. So kind of contrasting this really quick, I mentioned before, just like watching videos, passively doing things. That's what I would call passive practice, because you're just kind of letting language wash over you, right? But with deliberate practice, the whole point is that you are specifically going to work on something that is slightly beyond your abilities right now. So you're currently not really capable of doing this thing. It's just beyond the edge of what you're comfortable doing. And so when we're doing this type of deliberate practice, when I'm working with my clients in the community, the shape that takes is I give them some sort of, let's say it's in a live class, I give them some sort of prompt, be like, hey, we're going to practice selling ourselves today. So I want you to tell me for the next 3 minutes about yourself, about your background, and what makes you great at what you do. And then that's going to be very uncomfortable for them, right? Like this is where they struggle. They know they're going to make mistakes. They would typically try to avoid talking for that long. but I force them to talk that long. And then as they're doing that, I'm basically keeping track of everything that they're saying so that afterwards we can look sort of sentence by sentence at, okay, so here were some things that were really good. This is great. Getting that reassurance from a native speaker is part of the confidence building process. But then also, in this one, instead of saying XYZ, here's a better, more descriptive way to say it. Now, okay, say that sentence back to me out loud. Okay, now say it from memory out loud, right? And so it's this process of I'm forcing you to do something that you're currently not comfortable with. Then we're breaking it down, getting feedback, and then you're going to try to use it again. That's how we're ultimately going to help people break beyond that initial, oh, I just don't want to say anything because I don't want to make mistakes, into, okay, I'm going to actually take a risk now and explain more of these things because A, I've already done it 10 times with Kevin, and B, I know that a lot of the things I'm saying is good, right? They're accurate. And so I think a lot of confidence, and we'll see if you agree or not, is just built through repeated exposure to stressors and realizing that the world didn't end after that stressor, right?
I love the way you phrase that. The world didn't end. That's the key, right? And I do agree with you 100% because, with the people that I work with, they're usually transitioning into new fields, right? So a whole new world of jargon that they're not in tune with, right? And, someone trying to break into cybersecurity is going to be very overwhelmed if they're coming from a military background or if they're coming from a, education background or something. And especially military folks, I'm constantly trying to help people like translate their experiences and make them sort of fit this new world. People tend to have this, like, I don't know, maybe fear is what I would call it, of like, if I say it in the way that I've been saying it, no one will understand it. And I don't feel like that's necessarily true. I think it's maybe a little overblown in their minds, but we still work on it and we still trying, okay, well, you said, project management was called this in your previous role, but let's call it project management here in the jargony ways. But I do think that it is that, like, that ability to just keep practicing it over and over again. I had someone who said, I'll start networking once I get the jargon down. And I said, no, you're only going to get the jargon down if you start networking, right? And so once they actually started meeting people, they're like, oh yeah, you're right. It sticks a lot more when I'm talking to people and hearing them say it. And I like what you said, where you're like pushing them to get off book and do it from memory. I was helping someone train for a TED Talk once, and they had their script in front of them, and I ripped that thing out of their hands as fast as I possibly could, because I was like, get off book. Being on book is not good. You're never going to remember it this way. So I love what you're saying there, because I do think that is like the key to building confidence, is the ability to recall it. And I've even had some people who are like, can I just keep my answers up on my screen while I'm interviewing? And I'm like, please don't. Reading off a piece of paper is only going to either, one, sound robotic, or two, screw you up, because you're going to lose your place and then you're going to like go haywire. When you do push people to the edge of their comfort zone, what sort of pushback do you typically get? Because, in the job search, there's all sorts of different anxieties and triggers and different things that kind of come up to sort of halt people in there. And we keep pushing them through those barriers, right? But what are the typical barriers that you come across?
It kind of goes back to what you mentioned earlier about people over apologizing for things. Like, the first time or the first few times people go through these exercises with me, I have them talk, and then like halfway through, they're like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that, or, oh, I don't know what to say next, or I don't know. So like that, they just get so worked up about it, right? And that's where, again, the coaching comes in. So I'm like, hey, this is a safe space here. We're just here to practice. Like there's nothing to worry about. Like, just keep talking. I don't even care if you're still talking about the same thing I asked you to at the beginning. Just keep talking, right? Because one of the other things I tell my students a lot is that you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Like you're always going to have a slight degree of discomfort. And it's funny you mentioned cybersecurity before, because that is my background. Like for the past 9 years before switching to work on delivered English full time, I was a sales engineer for a software company that sold cybersecurity products. And talk about jargon and all these technical things and all this stuff you had to learn, like that was extremely stressful. And never at any point in those 9 years was I just like, oh yeah, this is no problem. I got this down. Like I have nothing to worry about anymore. But what I did do is I got comfortable being uncomfortable. I got good at anticipating some of the questions they were going to ask me. And then when I was prepping, I would just try to impromptu address some of those questions. And that's what I'm doing with these students too. So, they're feeling stressed, they're apologizing for what they're saying. And a lot of times they'll then ask me, hey, for the next class, can you give me a list of the topics first so that I can prepare? And then, like you said, the answer is no. I don't want you to prepare, because then that's not true to life. Like in 95% of situations in life, you're not going to be able to prepare word for word every single thing you're going to say, unless you're giving like a written speech in front of like a teleprompter or something, right? But in a conversation, it's all improv, right? So you can get the general ideas of what you want to say, but you still have to think on the spot. And that's what I'm basically simulating with these students in this community, in these classes, is no, you need to think on the spot. We're going to push you to that comfort zone. Outside of the comfort zone, don't apologize. And now let's work together to improve that.
I love that. Oh man, I'm so glad that you're making people improv, because that I think taking improv classes was probably one of the biggest benefits I've ever had in my life when it comes to communication, because it does just sort of shock your nervous system to a point where you're just like, I guess I have to go. I don't even know. Like, let's figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And you're bringing up something that I do in my mock interviews, which is, I say to people at the beginning of the mock interview, pretend I'm not your coach. I am a real interviewer. Because if I don't say that, what they end up doing is start answering a question incorrectly. And then they go, oh, wait, let me try that again. And I'm like, you could never do that in an interview. And what you're doing when you say that is you're robbing yourself of the recovery mechanism of your brain. And I'm always trying to encourage people, rather than trying to avoid mistakes, get a lot better at recovering from mistakes. And the way I see this in my own life is I'm a rambler. I love rambling. I go off topic. I go in all sorts of different directions. And I used to like have that fight, flight, or freeze mechanism, right? And for me, it was like freeze.
Yeah.
I would just like get stuck and like have a frog in my throat, and it would be terrible. And and I just remember like at a certain point, I was like, what other ways can I respond to this emotionally when I start rambling? And I was like, what if I just respond with like overexcitement? What if I'm like, all right, I catch myself rambling. Instead of freezing and getting panicky, I go, I'm sorry. I get really excited about these topics. Let me restate the question and try again. And almost always the interviewer is like, sure, whatever. Like they don't really care that much. And they're like, actually, I forgot what question I asked. So I'm glad you repeated it, And so I'm always encouraging people to like get better at responding properly when things go wrong, rather than trying to avoid it. Because I think that's the avoidance piece that you called out is such an important thing for people to stop doing. We cannot avoid these uncomfortable situations. We can only embrace them and push through them. What are some of the other types of emotional responses you see in people? There's over apologizing. There's obviously anxiety, but like, do people ever freeze? Do people ever like, I don't know, run away somehow? How would you run away from an interview? I don't even know. But like, what sort of things do you see come up emotionally for folks?
So freezing, I mean, definitely happens for sure. But I think, going to what you were just talking about the recovery of mistakes, I think what often happens is people tend to resort to grading themselves. And so what I mean by that is like, when you're a kid and you're going through middle school and high school, right, you make mistakes on a paper, your teacher writes it up in red ink, and then they give you a grade, and maybe it's not very good, and then your parents yell at you, and it's this very like negative experience all the way through. And so when people are going through these challenges with English and they're going through these exercises, they start to count. They count the number of mistakes they make. And they're like, oh my goodness, I made some mistakes. And so, we talked about freezing and apologizing. And there's also just like this deflating, right? You start to just get depressed with yourself because you're like, I've been taking these courses, I've been practicing, and I still make 10 mistakes every time I talk, or I still make 15 mistakes every time I talk. And it's like, they're just resorting to this old way of thinking of the number of mistakes equals your grade. And maybe that was true in high school, but that's not true in real life, at least as far as language learning is concerned. And so what I try to encourage them when they start to grade themselves like this is to stop thinking of the mistakes as this grade, but think of them as a custom study plan. It's a custom study plan. Because, if we think back again to just like a live class, you go to a class, the teacher's prepared some lesson for you, and they go talk about whatever that lesson is. If you're just sitting there listening to it, maybe 50% of it's relevant to you, maybe 20% is relevant to you, maybe 80, but there's a good chance that not everything that teacher's saying that whole time is relevant if they're just talking at you the whole time. Versus when I'm doing a class with a student in my community, as I said, 90% of the time they're talking. I'm not talking. So we're looking at their specific mistakes. And instead of counting them to give a grade, we say, hey, this is an area that's highly relevant to you. We were just talking about your job. This is a mistake you're making when you're talking about your job. So let's fix it. And so when something is relevant and timely, those are the things that your brain is going to remember versus, oh, Kevin gave a class today where he talked for an hour about, the best action verbs to put on your resume. Like maybe that person doesn't care about their resume right now. Maybe they already feel good about action verbs. So that might not be relevant to them. They just wasted an hour versus, hey, let's look at the mistakes. We're not going to count them to give you a grade so you feel depressed, where we're going to use them as a custom, highly relevant, highly targeted study plan for you. Now that gives you a better chance of actually improving and being able to use what you're learning at your job or in your next career search.
That's an incredible approach. I love that. Yeah. And the timeliness of information is so important. I remember I have worked with organizations in the past that it's like the student needs to be doing this thing at this point, at this week, doing this. And it's like, I don't know. I tend to find people get stuck in a certain area and they kind of need to stay in that area as long as as long as they need to in order to get through it. Otherwise they mentally can't move on to the next thing because they're still sort of stuck in like, how do I network or what am I trying to do with my career? Big questions, right? And so like, but this is where I think motivation and, drive come into play because, look, the job search is a long drawn out process. It can take anywhere from 3 to 6 months to a year, depending on someone's activities and all sorts of different stuff. And again, if you're native to the country, it's already a difficult situation with job boards and interviews and networking and all that stuff, let alone if you, again, have these additional considerations. And so when it comes to motivation and staying driven or like engaged, how do you sort of tackle that motivation piece with the folks that you work with? Are they pretty, intrinsically motivated and like, driven themselves? Do you have to create systems to, help them stay engaged and not burn out? What are some of the things that you typically see?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say in general, if they've come to me looking for help with this particular issue, they're probably going to skew more towards being motivated, right? Because they're actively seeking help. But that doesn't mean that like everybody all the time is just going to be able to persevere and constantly do exercises and show up to classes and stuff if they start to feel like things aren't going the way they want to. And so that's where, I think when it comes to language learning, one of the things that a lot of people want to avoid is feeling like they're alone. Like they don't want to feel like they're alone in this. They don't want to just go buy a video course and watch videos because then again, they're alone. They don't really know if they're improving. They don't really know where the problems are. And so, I call my platform a community for a reason. It's really meant to be something that is highly interactive because I think that that's how you do maintain a lot of this motivation. So not only do you have the teachers, myself and my staff kind of giving these corrections, giving these feedback pieces, whether it's offline or in a class, but you have other students there as well that are actively learning with you, that are in the classes with you, that are encouraging you, that you're having conversations with offline, that can help you feel like, hey, this is a community, this is a group of people, we're all working towards the same goal. I want to be a part of that. And then what also happens is I think success becomes a little contagious. So you see one person and they're like, yeah, this, I did really well at this today, or I wanted to publish this stories to see what you guys think. And then other people want to share too, right? So there are all these little like underlying systems in place to try to encourage you to not only just, use your language despite making mistakes, because I don't want you to grade yourself, but then to use it in a way where you actually are interacting with real human beings and not just some chat room or just like a graded paper you send in and then a week later someone replies to you.